Me and Johnny Slionski by Daniel Thomas Moran. I was not really the kind of kid who had a best friend. Some people do and some people don't. I'm still that way. I've had many friends over the years, but only one best friend as I could recall. A best friend was the guy you did everything with, a guy whose door you knocked on Saturday mornings and who met you after school every day, a guy in whose house you were always welcomed. When I recall the best times of my childhood, the ones with adventure and camaraderie, and even a little danger, I recall my best friend, Johnny Slionski. Johnny and I were kids together in the 1960s, before the world became unglued by war, assassination, and riots, before we knew anything but that we were kids with baseballs and footballs and bicycles in a little piece of Long Island called Massapequa. We were willing to get grass stains on our pants and grease on our hands, and even once in a while scrape the young skin off a knee or elbow just enough to make it bleed. My earliest memory I can conjure of Johnny Slionski was when we moved into the house on Westgate Road. In those days, the block was teeming with kids, and even as my father was unloading the U-Haul trailer, they came, one by one, just to have a look at us, to ask our names, to see if we wanted to play sometime. Johnny lived around the corner, just 5 houses away, and I cannot clearly see his face in my memory of that day, but I'm sure he was there. He must have been. It was 1963, the summer before first grade, and the world was as fresh and shiny as it would ever be for me, and for Johnny Slionski. I would not be surprised if, even before my bed had been moved into my new bedroom on the top of that split-level house we used to think was so big, that I jumped on my bike or ran off to play stickball. The Monroe brothers were probably there too, the two guys I tried my best to stay away from all my young life, the ones who were as likely to twist me to the ground and sit on my chest and make me say uncle as to ask me to play baseball. I always watched them from a safe distance. I grew up with a lot of rules, far too many, in fact. The Monroes had no rules. I was told to stay away from them, and I did as best as I could, considering that their front door was 50 feet from my own. Despite the closeness of our homes, Johnny Slionski had a very different life than I did. He was the youngest of 4 brothers and a much older sister, while I was the oldest of 3 brothers and a sister. His parents were much older than my own. At the time, my mother, with 3 kids no less, was just 25, my father 27. And while my father put on a suit and tie each morning before I got up and took the train to work for General Motors in Manhattan, Johnny's father was a burl of a man named Fuzzy, who worked in a body shop with wrenches and hammers, and came home each night with the clear evidence of his day's labors all over him. He was a bit of a scary-looking guy, but there was never anything to be scared about. Fuzzy Slionski was a nice man. Mrs. Slionski was the kind of woman who had to deal with keeping a handle on 5 men. I don't need to say anything more. She did it very well. I recall her as the kind of mom who might grab you by the ear and give it a twist if you had it coming. When Johnny Slionski and I made our first communion over at St. Rose's Church, all starched up in our blue suits and new shoes with our little Bibles clutched in our hands, Mrs. Slionski gave me a little statue of the Virgin Mary as a gift. She had made it for me and one for her son in a pottery class. Who knew that kids' mothers could make statues? When Johnny and I were 6 or 8 or 10, there was always something to do, even when there wasn't anything to do. When we were not choosing sides for a game or careening up and down driveway aprons on our bikes, we used our imaginations. We thought stuff up, and we did it. We played handball or stoop ball or 2 hands touch or cowboys and Indians. We climbed a tree or built some kind of contraption out of junk we pulled from the garbage. We even started a band. I was in the school band, had a snare drum and a hi-hat cymbal, and I liked to drum. I still do. Johnny had a cheap electric organ. I'm not sure he knew how to play it at all. But I can recall trying to play a song called Windy by The Association, We did it over and over and over. I really had the drum part down. In those days, if you said that you could play drums to any other kid, the first thing he said was, "Oh yeah? Play Wipeout." I could, even at age 9, and it impressed some of the big kids on the block, something that did not happen that often. There was never enough time in our days. I never remember ever sitting in another kid's house and watching his TV. Our parents forbid it. But they did not have to. When the weather was bad, we played with our Matchbox cars or HO race cars on tracks that we had in our houses. Johnny's brother Hank and Stosh had a big setup in their garage. The Slionskis had the kind of garage that probably never had a car in it. There was too much stuff. We loved to work on our little cars, interchange parts, paint them crazy colors, and replace the tires with tiny slicks that made them look like the cars we loved to watch on TV and read about in magazines, the funny cars and dragsters. We tried to find ways to make them go faster so we could win a race once in a while. Hank Slionski, 5 years older than we were, had figured something out, a way to modify the car that made it so fast it could not stay on the track. He told us if we ever tried to look at the bottom of any of his cars, he would beat us up. He did not want the secret to get out to the larger world. One day we got brave and looked. Kids like Johnny Slionski with older brothers were always getting beaten up anyway, and he figured it might be worth it. It was. One game we liked to play was called Johnny on the Pony. If we got about a dozen kids together, we would choose sides. One guy would wrap his arms around a tree while bent forward. Then the next guy would wrap his arms around that guy's waist and bend forward as well. When all 6 kids were assembled, there was a chain of bent-over kids that was about 8 to 10 feet long. The first kid on the other team had to run from across the yard. By placing his hands on the butt of the last kid on the chain, would vault himself as far up the chain as he could and sit there. Then came the second kid, vaulting all the way up to the first kid, and then each one in turn. The trick was not to fall off, or, if you were in the chain, to collapse under the weight on your back. By the time there were 5 kids all sitting on that chain like they were riding a giant horse, there was quite a lot of stress on the whole arrangement. Then came Johnny Slionski. Johnny was what we called stocky. By today's standards, he was pretty much normal size. In those days, he was what old people called a real bruiser. He could not vault very well, but he sure could land well. If he could get himself up on that last kid, the game was won. If he could not, it was lost. Either way, everyone collapsed in a pile, and we all had a great laugh. I can recall us trying to make a go-kart using old baby carriage wheels, adding a second set of forks over the top of the forks on our Stingray bikes to make it into a chopper just like the one we saw in Easy Rider. We attached old lawnmower engines to an old bicycle and used the end of a bat on the drive shaft as a friction driver on the back tire to motorize the bike. If you got caught riding down the block by that nasty cop from the 7th Precinct, he would confiscate the contraption and drag you home to your parents, probably knock you around a bit on the way. The Slionski boys had mini bikes and later motorcycles. Like Fuzzy, they loved cars and anything with an engine. Johnny and I did what we could to catch a ride when we were able, but the craziest thing was the time when we found 2 old wheelchairs in a place called the Pit, which was near our houses. Just like with the Monroes, my parents said, "Stay out of the Pit." There was a lot going on in there, all kinds of bad behavior, gangs and drinking, and we even found used-up tubes of model airplane glue lying around that the Pit Boys gang used to sniff to get high. Kids would set fires in there and make forts. The attraction was just too strong for us kids. It was a great place to ride our bikes, all trails and dirt and woods and danger. Anyway, one day we found these 2 old wheelchairs. They worked fine, and we could not figure out why someone tossed them in the pit. We took them back to Johnny's house and sat in them. Then we tried riding around in them. At some point, one of us learned how to pop the thing up on its back wheels and do wheelchair wheelies. It We got pretty good at it and began to have contests down the sidewalk to see who could go the furthest without tipping over. We did this for the better part of one summer back around 1967. Most people remember 1967 as the summer of love. For me and for Johnny Slionski, it was the summer of wheelchair races. The pit became something else not long after that, the Sunrise Mall. As so often happens in life, and especially the lives of kids, things change. Friendships come and go. People change a lot. I don't think we ever decided to not be friends anymore. Me and Johnny Slionski just had different interests, different circles in which we navigated our teen years and beyond. I have no bad memories where Johnny Slionski was concerned. About 10 years ago, around 1999, I took a drive around the old block and pulled up to the Slionski house, where I saw Mrs. Slionski sitting on the stoop. I walked up the short walk and asked her if she remembered me. She did. It must have damn near given her a heart attack to see me after nearly 40 years. And I wish I had not been in such a hurry that day. I never even asked her about Johnny, where he was, what he'd been doing, and I cannot say why. Just yesterday, I heard that he died several years ago. After all these years, I could not help but feel really sad. Sad for all of us who were young once. Young together. We shared something once, Johnny Slionski and me. A childhood. A great childhood. One we made for ourselves.